Well, what a fun week it's been, and I'll tell you, I do want to just say a big thank you. I know they're in the green room now, but they can probably still hear me. But to have a live band at VBS, for these guys to put in some extra time and all the folks in the background, the tech and everything that goes into that. These people, they poured in hours and hours and hours of their lives. And what a great team effort. What a great church. I am so thankful to be part of Pineville Church that does something like this. Well, it has been fun. It's been a fun month where we've been talking about these heroes of the Bible's men and women who are just ordinary people who trusted God, right? And trusted his love for them. And there is nothing like trusting God's love, right? Like even when we make a mess of things, even when sometimes you make the right choices and you still get creamed for it, even when these heroes felt like no one loved them or cared for them, they could always come back to the truth that God loved them no matter what. I tell you, it was so cool. And one of the nights, I think it was the last night of VBS, one of the things we wanted to make sure that every kid, because let me tell you, I know that they may not realize it, but there will be points in their lives down the road when they'll find themselves in a situation, and to remember that God loves you no matter what, that's powerful. And so we told them that. We made sure that they left here remembering that. But there's nothing like knowing God loves you like that. This is where these heroes that we've been reading about and studying about, this love is where they drew their source of life from. It is what drove their faith and helped them become who they are. This love became a source of power, right? I don't think we realize how powerful God's love really is. It became a source of power in their life. But I think we need to make sure we don't mistake what this kind of power is. See, we're familiar with the different types of powers, right? This idea of power. Like when we watch the Avengers or Superman, yeah, right, got that? And like, it was very uncomfortable unbuttoning my shirt like this today, but I wanted you to see this right here, all right? We watch these different heroes on TV, like the Avengers, and there's a lot of power. There's power in the superheroes. There's power in supervillains. There's power in the weapons and their whatever it is that they have, their magic that they have. And yes, it is all make-believe. But the idea of power is also why sometimes we are drawn to these heroes. Heroes find the power somehow to do something great. I think of the character that I've been dressing up this week as, right? And I think we have a picture there, right? There's my Captain America with Wonder. My Wonder Babe is what I called her. She loves it when I do that. But I've had this costume, this Captain America costume, for like 6 years. So long that the Velcro is starting to not work very good in the back. But a little bit of Captain America's backstory is this. He and his best friend Bucky were young, and World War II was going on, and they wanted to be a part of it. And his best friend Bucky goes, and they both go and try to join the army. Bucky, he gets in, but Steve Rogers, who eventually becomes Captain America, Steve Rogers does not. See, Steve didn't have what it took. He wasn't physically built enough, and he's devastated by this. And in his low point, because he didn't get into the army, a scientist notices him. And this scientist has been working for the American government, and they put together this plan. He's come up with this serum that he could maybe put into Steve's body, and he turns into this super soldier. And it works. And Steve Rogers transforms into Captain America. Suddenly, Steve Rogers has what it takes. Long story short is this. Steve Rogers ends up becoming Captain America. And now Steve Rogers has the power to make a difference. The power to make a difference. Unfortunately, this power that Captain America has, even the power of the other super heroes, the Avengers have, it's complicated power. Because their power might be able to stop supervillains, but it also destroys a lot of innocence in its wake. That's why we talk about that the power that God gives us. We're not talking about fairy tales or creative superheroes who have secret serum flowing through their veins or metal armor that protects us from bullets or alien power crystals. No. The power that God gives us is literally based on a love that melts away bitterness and overcomes hopelessness. God's power in us flows from grace and mercy. God helps us to experience forgiveness for our selfish, sinful mentality, forgiveness for living our lives as though God doesn't exist, forgiveness for not trusting God's love for us in everything, forgiveness for trusting in ourselves by taking matters into our own hands. And this week, one of the Bible heroes that we talked about was a guy named Peter. Now, Peter was one of the 12 disciples, one of the very first that Jesus called to follow him. And one of the very first who said yes to leaving his life, his way of life behind and stepping into the new life that Jesus called him into. The story we talked about with Peter this week with the kids that I had was the one where Peter walked on water, right? Now, that might sound kind of superhero-ish. It might be a kind of thing that you think a superhero would do. But this story really isn't so much about Peter walking on the water. It's about something bigger and deeper. See, Jesus had just finished this incredible miracle where 5,000 to 10,000 people, men and women and children, he had fed them with very little food and turned it into this great amount. And at the end of this incredible miracle, and people are wanting more and more of Jesus and wanting to hear more of Jesus, Jesus tells his disciples to set out on a boat to go across the lake away from the crowd. And we're going to look at this story in Matthew chapter 14. We're going to dive into it a little deeper. I could only hit the surface a little bit this week with the kids, but I want us to look a little bit deeper into this story. Matthew chapter 14. Here's where how it goes down. Verse 22, immediately after this, Jesus insisted that his disciples get back into the boat and cross to the other side of the lake while he sent the people home. And after sending them home, he, Jesus, went up into the hills by himself to pray. Night fell while he was there alone. Meanwhile, the disciples were in trouble far away from land, for a strong wind had risen, and they were fighting heavy waves. About 3 o'clock in the morning, Jesus came toward them, walking on the water. When the disciples saw him walking on the water, they were terrified. In their fear, they cried out, "It's a ghost!" But Jesus spoke to them at once. Let's say this together, will you? Don't be afraid. Keep going, he said. Take courage. I am here. Then Peter called to him, Lord, if it's really you, tell me to come to you, walking on the water. Yes, come, Jesus said. So Peter went over the side of the boat and walked on the water toward Jesus. But when he saw the strong wind and the waves, he was terrified and he began to sink. Save me, Lord, he shouted. Jesus immediately reached out and grabbed him. You have so little faith, Jesus said. Why did you doubt me? When they climbed back into the boat, the wind stopped. Isn't that good? Then the disciples worshiped him. You really are the Son of God, they exclaimed. This story is more real life than I think we'd like to admit. I'm really excited here in a few weeks, and it's actually starting the first Sunday in September. We're gonna do a series called A Different Kind of Christian. And we'll be exploring what what a Christian like Jesus actually looks like. And I want us to tackle some of the misconceptions out there that, well, to be honest, they've done a lot of damage. And see, that's what this story is about. This idea of what it means to be a real follower of Jesus and to experience the ups and downs, if we're really honest about it, right? Like, here are these disciples out on this boat. It's 3 a.m. The wind and the waves must have pushed them far out, right? And so they are scared to death. Things are kind of a wreck around them. They were in trouble. And, it would have been ridiculously dark. I was thinking about this. There's no electricity, right? These are Bible times. There's no electricity that they can see around them. So it's got to be ridiculously dark. And it probably felt like, with those crashing waves and that wind, it probably felt like everything was crashing in on them. Well, does that sound a little familiar to anybody? Like, I think about how we are. We're actually just crazy. Somebody was just talking to me this morning about, like, where did July go, right? Here we are, just a few weeks. Some of our kids are going to be starting kindergarten. Some will be going into a new grade, or middle school, or high school, or college, or a new job. And it might be kind of scary. You might be out of your element, surrounded by circumstances that are out of your control. Maybe if none of those pertain to you, maybe there are waves in your life personally that have come out of nowhere, right? This is what's going on for these guys in this boat. Things are out of their control. Ooh. And then there he is. There is this figure. Now, when I think about how people react to Jesus and what they think about Jesus, not necessarily the way they react to some of the Christians they see, but to Jesus, it's really interesting, right? Like, for some people, this idea of Jesus might be really scary. Or this idea that Jesus is God and Jesus offers us a way of life in this life or the life to come. To some, it's weird. To some, it's annoying. To some, it tugs at their hearts. And even to those of us who are followers of Jesus and believe in Jesus, sometimes we aren't really sure where this is going. Anybody ever felt like that? But there he is, in the middle of these crashing waves. And Peter, good old Peter, Peter is known as one of those kinds of guys who does and then thinks later, right? Like, I picture Peter as being one of these people who sees a challenging situation and is like, hang on a minute, I'm going to go in. He's all in. I kind of pictured Peter as being one of the most adventurous Bible characters there is. Now, I have a son that I think is a little bit like Peter. Some of you who have kids know what it's like when you see this in your children. A couple of weeks ago, we were actually out. We made a trek up to Pisgah National Forest, right? Just a couple of hours away from here, up into the foothills, into the mountains a little bit there. And we found a creek or a river. It's called Wilson's Creek. And we had not been up in that area before. And just the four of us, me, my daughter, my son, and Becky. And this river has these big boulders and rocks that are down in it, and people can climb out in it, and it's beautiful, it's amazing. And there were a few other people who had been there before us already, and we saw them when we got there, and these is about 4 different guys, and there was this one big rock that was like overlooking a swimming hole, right? And they would jump off this rock. Now, believe it or not, I'm not really one of those kind of people. All my life, even when it's the high diving board, I think I can do it, and I get up there, And I'm like, oh my goodness. And I'll sit down on the edge and somebody has to push me off, right? And as soon as I saw those guys out there on that rock jumping off, I thought, if Landon sees that, I'm going to have to do this. Because there's nobody else here to do it with him. Becky's a big chicken, and Lily takes after her mother on these kinds of things. Sure enough, Landon sets out like, we have got to go, Dad. We've got to go out there and we got to do this. You got to come with me, Dad. You got to come with me. All right, son, let's go. We went. Now, I decided to jump off when I figured out that the swimming hole actually only came up to about right here, and there was sand at the bottom. So I jumped off, so it was fine. Sometimes I don't tell you the end of the story. I went, all right? I jumped off. I was a big boy this time, all right? I was all in. But this is what I view of Peter, right? Being this all-in kind of guy who just goes for it. But here's why this story is pretty honest. Peter steps out of the boat. And he begins to walk. Now, sometimes I view like this idea that Peter should have just kept on walking. And if the person who wrote this, if he wanted to be kind of fake about it, he could have left out the part that Peter began to sink, right? Like if he just wanted to highlight the good moment in Peter's life, but he doesn't. See, sometimes there's a view that being a Christian means never having any doubts, or that people who are Christians are living out of touch. And yes, there are definitely those who refuse to admit these moments. I certainly have been one of those kinds of people at times where I pretended that to have it all together. And if anyone ever knew the times I was scared or wondered where God was, then surely they would kick me out. But in this moment, we find what faith in Jesus is really all about. Because even when Peter begins to sink in the waves, it's Jesus who reaches out for him. Even when Peter is suddenly filled with so much doubt, Jesus reaches out for him. Peter's doubt was not the end of his faith in Jesus. It was part of the journey that Jesus was taking him on and leading him through. Listen, here it is. And this is what we need to tell the world about. Believing in Jesus doesn't mean we won't ever feel like we're overwhelmed. It doesn't mean we won't have any doubts. Believing in Jesus is about learning to trust that he will pick us up. That's what it is. And this would not be the last time that Peter found himself in the middle of a pretty bad situation. After Jesus calms a few more waters in Peter's life, even after the years with Jesus, even after declaring that he would never leave Jesus, that he would never deny Jesus, it was this Peter, one of the leaders of Jesus' small group of friends, who denied him 3 different times. On the very night that they beat and they tortured Jesus, once again, Peter finds himself sinking deep into the waves, filled with fear, filled with anger, filled with hopelessness, until 3 days later on the shore of a lake, Jesus shows up again. This time, Jesus has come back to life. And the power that brought Jesus back to life restores Peter. In John chapter 21, listen to this story here, this interaction. So later, Jesus appeared again to the disciples beside the Sea of Galilee. This is how it happened. Several of the disciples were there: Simon Peter, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. Simon Peter, here he is, Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." "We'll come too," they all said. So they went out in the boat, but they caught nothing all night. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellas, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right side of the boat and you'll get some." So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved said to Peter, "It's the Lord." He recognized him, right? And when Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, here he goes again, he put on his tunic, for he had stripped for work, jumped into the water and headed for shore. Boom! Peter saw that it was Jesus, man. He is all in. This time, though, you got to think. It'd been 3 days, right? Just a few nights before, he denied him. Peter was sinking. The rest of the story is that Jesus is there on the shore and he has a fire, a charcoal fire, and a lot of the language there is very similar to the charcoal fire where Peter had been standing around when they asked him if he knew Jesus, and he said no 3 times. Here he is again around another charcoal fire with Jesus. And what happens here is an incredible healing begins to happen in Peter's life. Jesus asked Peter 3 times if he loved him. And it's thought that parallel to the 3 times that Peter had denied him. And all of this is about the forgiveness and healing that Peter finds in Jesus, who reaches down and picks him back up again and draws him in. This is the power of Jesus. See, Peter goes on from there to become this great leader. In fact, he is thought to have been the one who shares the good news of Jesus to those who are outside of the Jewish faith, who are called Gentiles. This is the power of Jesus. This is what Jesus does. It reaches into the deepest parts of our being, the deep down brokenness and hurt, the deep down fear and doubt. Jesus has the power to reach within the deep hurt of our lives, the power to bring healing, the power to restore, the power to make new. And this is what Peter does. Peter even eventually loses his life because of his faith in Jesus. See, the same Peter who sank in the water, who denied he knew Jesus, found the power to live for Jesus. This hero discovered the grace of God. It was grace that reached down and picked him up in the middle of those crashing waves. It's interesting because what should be the ripple effect from the life of a Christian should be healing, hope, peace, and joy. See, that's what should begin to happen, and that is what happens with Peter as he grows, as he learns to trust this love, as he learns to trust Jesus, as he learns to trust the living Jesus. He goes on to live and tell the story, and then there are other lives, and guess what? Even you and I are here because of what Jesus did in Peter's life. That is the power of Jesus. It's a different kind of power than what we see in movies. It's not a power that leaves destruction in its wake. It's a power that brings healing wherever it goes. we can trust in the power of God's grace. Let's stand together. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes just for a moment as we move into a time of reflection and response? Jesus is calling you to follow him. Jesus is calling you to follow him. Just like he called Peter, he's calling you. Just like when he said to Peter to step out of the boat, he's calling you to follow him. If you are interested today in following Jesus, I want you to respond to him. To respond to this call. To say yes to him. To give him your heart, to give him your life, and begin to learn what it means to trust his love for you. Maybe you stepped out of the boat and started down this journey at some point, but you looked up and you saw the waves. Maybe these last couple of years, maybe this economy, maybe something has come up in your life and it feels like you're overwhelmed. And today you're reminded that Jesus is reaching out to you now to lift you up, to draw you close, to experience his love. Something else interesting about this story, it says, when he got Peter back in the boat, the waves calmed down. And those disciples who were there, they began to worship him. They said, surely you are the Son of God. So maybe today, maybe you just need to worship Jesus and give him thanks for who he is and what he's done in your life. Where does this find you today?